So to my eagle-eyed viewers, this may look a little familiar to you. Way back in early 2018, I uploaded this episode using Xbox Record and then downloading it from the Microsoft website, so it turned out to be a stunning 720p at 18 frames per second. Basically nausea-inducing. So it's time to update this video and do it some justice. On Tideman Station, in the events of Game in Space, that's super annoying I have to call it that, many kids resided on the space station with their parents. Life for them was pretty standard as with many children. Lots of energy, not enough space to get it out. You know, the standards to really drive your parents to take Excedrin and maybe engage in copious amounts of adult beverages. Prior to the outbreak, but shortly after the completion of the giant marker built by Isaac, kids would begin acting strangely, however. Eventually, these kids would go on to become what is known as the Pack. In this episode, let's cover the lore and morphology of what happens when a parent's precious little gumdrop succumbs to the Necromorph outbreak, but also discuss how this disease changes the body when there is so little biomaterial to work with. Prior to the outbreak on Tideman Station, within the school, the effects of the marker's influence were being felt just like everywhere else across the station. What adults would find terrifying, kids found more to be due to their imagination. Your typical adult, who was having their brain scrambled by the signal, would see apparitions that weren't really there. Hallucinations and aggressive behavior soon followed afterwards until they were eventually driven to game end, those around them, or themselves. In the classrooms, however, the first instances began to show up as imaginary friends. Children began exhibiting disruptive symptoms, claiming that they were seeing these friends in class, and it became so disruptive that the teachers would end up reprimanding the children. As time continued, the school nurse would note that the kids would also end up becoming more aggressive with one another, while some were becoming more withdrawn. Kids would begin pushing other kids down, fights would break out, some would sit in the corner, borderline comatose, and others began to draw symbols on the wall with crayons. They all chalked this up to being raised on a space station, but things were about to get a lot worse for everyone. During all this, a tipping point was reached, more than likely the same point the infected infants were turned by the yellow bacteria and the infectors of the outbreak spread. This is where, as I get older, the prospect becomes more and more visceral, which is a good time, at least for me. Most children appear to have been at school on your typical school day. Some may have been home, as we see the Pack in a lot of different areas, but specifically in the gym of the school, a play was being rehearsed. Pulling back the curtain, we can see that someone ended up turning, or the children were hiding here. In this grossly confined area, every child was trapped and turned. Judging by what we see later, deep slashes to the abdominal area were likely the method of injury that ultimately led to their end. Big oof on the handprints trying to crawl out of that confined space. That was that's pretty messed up. But even still, within the stage area, as you make your way through the props, more horrors awaited us. Anyhow, these children would go on to spread across the entire sprawl. Due to their smaller stature as they were younger, they would be much weaker than an adult necromorph and lack the sheer stopping power of them as well. To make up for this weakness, the marker seemingly had a plan for these children. They would hunt as a pack in groups of about 10 or 20 individuals. To a singular adult, or even possibly a small group of adults, this would quickly overwhelm them. To soldiers in rig armor, their suits would supply them with a barrier in which to survive hits from the pack, but even still, if they didn't keep their wits about them, they could be quickly run through and lose their head in the process. When Isaac encounters the Pack in any situation, they will appear accompanied by other necromorphs usually, whether that be from a tripod attack or presumably the teachers in the gym, and even with the corrupted who were clearly other adults utilized for their biomass. So what do we see when we experience a Pack attack? Well, your typical Pack member will appear gangly, move like an ape, and is pretty quick with all gray skin. The gray skin can be squarely placed on the fact that due to their apparent injuries, blood loss would have led to hypovolemic shock, and their skin is the first to lose blood. So let's discuss the process real quick to get an idea of how horrifying their fate actually was. Due to the abdomen cut that we see on a Pack member, not only are your intestines in this area, but behind them exists the abdominal aorta. This was more than likely cut deep enough to reach this critical component in the body. When this happens, the body would immediately go into panic mode. However, with only about 30 seconds before blood loss became too great, and this would lead to their expiration, not much could really be done. Blood would drain away from their skin quickly, which in turn would cause it to gray and ashen. Another possibility is that the aorta was not hit. If this was the case, the abdominal bleed is not as quick as you might imagine. The beta and alpha receptors in the body would have been activated to control bleeding and compensate for this blood loss. Vasoconstriction would happen in the skin and muscle as blood levels continued to dip. Our body always doesn't know how to compensate correctly, and the intestines and core, as well as the brain, would have been the focus to get the blood to. Unfortunately, this is where the damage would be, so this would lead to the bleed actually picking up pace, and eventually the body body would be no longer able to compensate. Ultimately, this would result in hypovolemic shock as well, resulting in coma and quick game end after. Really, it's a gut-wrenching way to go for the kids. Alright, either way, this would explain the rapid graying skin that we see, considering that there are still adult Necromorphs with their original skin color still quite prevalent. So what do we actually see with the pack? You know what I haven't really mentioned in a while? Starting with the feet, we see that the pack member's foot is just as their original foot was formed. No changes besides the grayed out skin can be seen. Due to this, the structure of the leg has remained plantar, and they will run flat-footed as well. Some have a propensity to run on the balls of their feet, but it will be sort of a heel-to-toe style of running. The shins and calves have passing damage to them, but this really could be due to crawling through vents and moving under rubble. Lines of dried blood do exist around the legs in this area, but it stems from further up, suggesting that any wound on the leg is actually post-mortem. The legs retain their muscle mass and original shape. Just so you know, if too much muscle mass was actually taken and moved by the infection, this may render the children unable to walk or use these legs, so they were presumably left alone by the infection for this reason. Moving up to the groin area, we can see the injury administered that more than likely led to the game end for this pack member. A large mid-sagittal abdominal cut continues all the way up to the xiphoid process at the base of the sternum. Additionally, a cut can be seen even running slightly over the chest as well, suggesting this was a pretty violent slice. Moving up to the chest in general, we see that damage apart from the continuing slice is minimal. A few areas may be damaged by the alteration this child experienced, but nothing that would have contributed to their end. On the back of the pack member, we see that the shoulder blades have not only been pushed out of the skin, but moved outwards too. This has done a few things for the pack member. First, it has changed their ability of the arms to move, and as such, give it a wider range of motion. With this larger lever as well, this would help the pack member deliver more power to each swipe. On top of this, ligaments, tendons, and muscle have been formed in this area and attached to these new shoulder blades, which will help the pack member contend with adults and viciously attack them with more strength. Without these shoulder blades, the pack member would not be able to do what it does when we get to what happens when it overpowers Isaac. Instead, it would more than likely just have the strength of a child, which means you could probably punt them. Moving down the arms, the biceps and triceps of this creature are about the size they originally were pre-mortem. Presumably all the muscle is still intact in the arms, and the extra meat in the shoulder blades would come from the latissimus dorsi and spinal connective tissue, as well as what was already there. When we get down to the forearms of the pack member, we begin to see the changes have begun to take place in the body that weren't originally there. In the lower part of the forearm and wrist, this area has grown in size for more than just what could be edema related. Considering a lot of force is imparted into the wrists of a pack member upon striking any person nearby, a child's wrist would not be strong enough to support this force. The wrists are larger than that of an adult's and would require more bone. Bone was added to the lower forearms and wrists, and this bolstering allows them to absorb the impact that their hands impart, because as Newton said, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. If you hit something, that same amount of force is coming right back at you. But speaking of hands, they are mostly destroyed. 2 fingers apparently have gone missing during the struggle, and what's left has grown into 3 large claws. These claws are presumably the phalanges. These phalanges have lengthened and have stayed connected. They appear to be somewhat sharpened, much like that of the blades that we see on other adult necromorphs. Moving up to the head, we see that this child has lost a lot of its features, but retained its overall shape and base. Morphology. The hair on its head, eyebrows, and really any mammalian traits have fallen off. The mouth has lost its lips either due to an attack or by the mouth changing and tearing skin. The lower jaw has large bony protrusions where the teeth used to be to make its bite exceedingly dangerous. On top of this, the nose has taken quite a bit of damage. It is there in some capacity, but lacking. The eyes are borderline shut and desiccated within the skull. And finally, the ears still exist on the sides of the head, so presumably they could still be used to hear any human prey within the area. The overall body of the pack member is fairly frail. Muscle, bone material, and tendons have been moved to different areas, which has led to a weakness to be formed in the legs and joints of the body. This makes them weak enough to be dismembered by an adult swinging anything that they have. This is made up for by their numbers and ability to communicate, it seems. Pack members still have full use of their vocal cords and will alert other members of the hunt with a shrill screech. This communication is integral to their success, as if attacking alone, they virtually represent a very little, if any, threat. Before getting into what we are really all here for, let's discuss 2 things. First, what's the deal with the pack members being around the tripod in the church? So it's time for a hypothesis or even a conspiracy. The Church of Unitology, seen throughout the game, was having their younger generation become indoctrinated and preparing them for their rituals. So much like with any religion, it's not too far-fetched to think that because of this, they may have either had a recruiting area for children, a school for children, a sort of daycare, or even an orphanage. Regardless, there were a large amount of children somewhere in the church, as seen at the entrance in the lobby, and also in in the church later on. And this is how it ties into my tripod video. When attacked in the church, you are attacked by a female tripod, the only one you actually run into. Why? Well, presumably the unitologists were sort of ready to go. As such, and due to the proximity the pack seems to be around the tripod, this may have actually been their caretaker. And seeing as she has changed in the way she was, she would have needed others to be arranged around her in a certain way. So my hypothesis is that the caretaker was sacrificed willingly to create the tripod, and the children were more than likely used as well to create the pack that we see in the church. So that was just an extra little bit because I've always kind of wondered that. The second thing is, and this is really just kind of an extra bit of lore for you, on Tal Volantis, you actually run into pack members a second time. However, these particular pack members are not human children in the military. Instead, they appear to be the young but not infants of the native Tal Volantians due to their large spikes and changes in skeletal structure. So if you ever want to know what that was about, now you know. Should you get into a confrontation with a pack member, they will quickly jump on you trying to get a hit in before you can knock them off. For some reason, Isaac isn't feeling it today. Maybe he didn't train to fight 12 kids at once like we all should. Maybe he just didn't eat his Wheaties. Regardless, the pack member will get a foothold and bite into Isaac's arm and shoulder. The bone protrusions seem to be enough to break the humerus bone and tear through the tricep and bicep. This would quickly rip through the arm and structurally damage it to the point that it could be torn off. This would sever the brachial artery and lead to a quick bleed out, but they're not done yet. Isaac will look at the pack member and it will slice his head off with its claws. The second option is Isaac is ready. He has been fighting waves of second graders with a fifth grader boss every 10 waves. He will lift the pack member into the air, striking it with his plasma cutter or whatever he happens to be holding. This will quickly tear the pack member apart and he will cast it to the side to continue laying down the smackdown on these unruly youngins. Anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope everyone enjoyed my revamped episode covering the pack. Also, the second channel, Croatoad Medical, has its Vampire Syndrome episode up if you want to go see that. Link will be in the description and pinned comment. If you like the episode, leaving a like helps, and if you are new, subbing is a great way to stay up to date when I post. I also want to say one more thing about the Croatoad Medical channel. If you've ever seen like SciShow or PBS Eons or something like that, I got some stuff coming in the mail where I will be doing kind of a more webcam-based thing. That didn't sound weird. Anyways, it's gonna work, trust me. But also, go check out the old video. It's definitely worth a good old-fashioned eye gouge. Anyhow, I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, merch, and Patreon links in the description if you'd like to support the channel. And I'd like to thank a few of my patrons. Huge shout out to our astronauts, It's Not a Spoon, and Laffy No Skill. Thank you guys. I also want to thank Freedom Units 44, Skilt, and the Lone Titan, as well as the rest of my patrons. Your assistance goes a long way, and I do appreciate it. Alright, so that does it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. Go check out that second channel if you haven't, and I will see y'all in the next one.